The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. When Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of King Herod, behold, Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, "Where is the newborn King of the Jews? We saw his star at its rising and have come to do him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was greatly troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. Assembling all the chief priests and the scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. They said to him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it has been written through the prophet, 'And you, Bethlehem, land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, since from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel.'" Then Herod called the Magi secretly and ascertained from them the time of the star's appearance. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go, search diligently for the child. When you have found him, bring me word that I too may go and do him homage." After their audience with the king, they set out. And behold, the star that they had seen at its rising preceded them until it came and stopped over the place where the child was. They were overjoyed at seeing the star, and on entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother. They prostrated themselves and did him homage. Then they opened their treasures and offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed for their country by another way. The Gospel of the Lord. Back at the beginning of December, my mother came here to Cambridge and gave a talk about the infancy narratives of the Gospel according to St. Matthew. And I borrowed greatly from her talk the last week of Advent and also my Christmas homily. And today I'm going to be doing the same. I'll be blending part of her talk with some of my own research as we celebrate the feast day of the Epiphany, where we have the account of the three wise men. And this account only appears in Matthew's Gospel. Matthew introduces us to these three wise men, Magi from the east. He says, "When Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of King Herod, behold, Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, 'Where is the newborn King of the Jews? We saw his star at its rising and have come to do him homage.'" So that the Gentile Magi from the east, they seek the newborn King of the Jews in order to do him homage. At the very beginning of life then, of Jesus' life then, we see the ones that we would least expect, Gentile Magi, we're going to talk about them in a little bit, seeking him out. They welcome Israel's Messiah, while the leader of the Israelites, some of Christ's own people, they will be the ones who plot to destroy him. And as I said on Christmas, this is a major theme in Matthew's Gospel, where God's plan of salvation is extended to all nations, not just Israel. So we have it in the beginning with the Magi, and then at the end of the Gospel we have it in Jesus' command to baptize all nations. So who were these wise men? The Magi were pagan wise men from Persia, which is modern-day Iran, and they were a priestly, learned class. They would have been highly educated. The Jewish philosopher Philo, he wrote in the first century, he said that among the Persians there is the body of the Magi, who investigate the works of nature for the purpose of becoming acquainted with the truth. So essentially what he's saying is that they were the scientists of their day. They were searching for truth. And they would have had a significant grasp of things like astronomy. And so this new star would have caught their attention. However, why would people who predict and observe stars have associated this star with a king in a land a really long ways away, in the land of Judah? Well, there had to be a fairly well-known prophecy across the world, really, of a Jewish king for them to come to this conclusion. And we actually find an example of that prophecy that would have been known to non-Jews alike in the book of Numbers. And that is the prophecy of Balaam. So Balaam, in fact, there's historical references to this guy outside the Bible. That's how well known he was. And I wish I could go into more details about the story of Balaam, because there's some pretty entertaining parts. There's a part with the talking donkey. But in a nutshell, here's what happened. So the story starts with the king of Moab, which is a land to the southeast of Israel. King Balak is his name. And this was during the period, so this is the book of Numbers, where the Israelites are still wandering through the desert for 40 years. And they're wandering uncomfortably close to his kingdom of Moab. And he's afraid of the size of their numbers. And so he hires a guy, well-known guy named Balaam, and he hires him to curse Israel. This is sort of like his job. He was, I don't know, like a sorcerer. He could conjure up evil spirits and curses, and he was well known for this across the region. However, each time Balaam tries to curse Israel, God essentially takes the words out of his mouth and replaces them. And he prophesies words of blessing rather than words of cursing. And it's not like, and by cursing I don't mean like saying naughty words, I mean like wishing a curse upon somebody. And it's not like God causes Balaam to mess up a few words, and finagle what was meant to be a curse into a blessing. This is a full-on blessing that goes on and on and on. And in his fourth and final attempt to curse Israel, the Spirit of God comes upon Balaam, and this time he prophesies about a future king coming out of Israel. And according to this oracle, this prophecy, a star would be the sign of the king's arrival. He says this, "I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come forth of Jacob, a scepter shall rise out of Israel." And since we hear about Balaam in other non-biblical sources, we know that this non-Jewish pagan oracle of Balaam would have circulated in the East. It would have been known among the scholarly. And those familiar with this prophecy would have known that the sign and the stars would be associated with the king that would have something to do with Israel. And that would have included the Magi of Matthew's gospel. So apparently they realize that this Jewish king is important not only for the Jews, but for the rest of the world, and so they seek him out. And they make this journey all the way from the east to Jerusalem to ask Herod where to find this newborn king. And the travel route from Persia to Jerusalem would have been well over 1,000 miles, something incredible distance. It would have taken them months to travel. So what was this star that they noticed? How would they associate this star with the king and thus be led by the oracles to Jerusalem? There would have been various explanations and the attempts at explanations all throughout history. Maybe it was a comet, maybe it was some sort of supernova or some kind of planetary conjunction. And my favorite is the planetary conjunction theory, which is called a syzygy. Syzygy is where three astronomical bodies line up together. And it's also my favorite word in English because it's spelled S-Y-Z-Y-G-Y. But anyways, and what I'm about to describe isn't quite a syzygy, but I wanted to use the word in the homily. So logically, the Star of Bethlehem couldn't have been a shooting star. Those last, for a second or two. And also, it couldn't have been a comet or something similar because that would have been obvious to everybody. And by Herod's reaction, we know that it wasn't obvious to everybody. He starts doing research and, turning to his advisors as to what this could possibly mean. So it couldn't have been some obviously dramatic phenomenon, but it had to have been something extraordinary that a learned person would have noticed. Did anything happen in the sky around the time of Jesus' birth? And the answer is yes. The stars in the skies are so predictable and so measurable and so perfectly ordered that we can actually recreate the night sky from 2,000 years ago in simulations. And now I'm going to get nerdy on you. You thought syzygy was bad. Get ready. So as the planets appear in the night sky, they sort of wobble and tilt. And this is because of the spin of the Earth and how much closer they are to us than the stars are. And the word planet actually comes from the Greek word that means to wander, because the planets did not follow the same, predictable circular path that the stars do. So if you were to do a sort of a time lapse of the wobble of these planets, it would basically be a ring, like oval shaped. And at the time of Jesus' birth, the planet Jupiter, the brightest planet in the sky, followed its normal motion, back and forth, wobbling. But at this time, that motion created a ring, the wobble ring, or you could call it a crown-like pattern, over the star known as Regulus. The Magi would have known Jupiter as the king planet. He was the king of the Roman gods, the brightest and biggest planet. And the name Regulus also means king. That's where we get like the word regal from. And so we have the king planet giving the king star a king's crown. At the same time this occurred, all within the constellation of Leo. And Leo is the lion. And the Magi would have known that the lion was the biblical symbol for the Israelite tribe of Judah, where Israel's kings came from. And the Old Testament prophesies that the Messiah would be born of the tribe of Judah. Also, at that same time, the constellation that arose in the east after Leo was the constellation Virgo, the Virgin. And right at the feet of the constellation at that particular moment was the new crescent moon, or the birth of the moon, so to speak. And of course, we have the moon as a symbol of Mary also. So to summarize, you have the king of planets forming a crown over the king's star within the king constellation, born of a virgin. King, king, king. And as I said in my Christmas homily, which was also taken from Mom's talk, when you say three things in the Bible in a row, king, 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 or for example, holy, 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 it means it's the most of something. Holy, holy, holy means the most of something. So king, king, king means the king of kings, the greatest, the highest of all kings. So the star leads the wise men as far as Judea, and it's logical that they would go there first because that's where the king lived. And if it's a prophecy about a Jewish king, why wouldn't she go to Jerusalem? But when King Herod heard this, he was greatly troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And assembling all the chief priests and the scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. They said to him, in Bethlehem of Judea. For it was thus that had been written through the prophet, and you, Bethlehem, land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, since from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel. Then Herod called the Magi secretly and ascertained from them the time of the star's appearance, and he sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and search diligently for the child. When you have found him, bring me word that I may too go and do him homage. So this news about the Magi looking for a new king quickly freaks King Herod out. King Herod was violently paranoid. He would regularly have who he believed to be conspirators murdered. He even had a few of his sons killed off, whom he suspected of wanting to take the throne from him. And so Herod is troubled. He's not happy about this news. And so he gathers the chief priests and he asks them what's going on. And then he pretends to be interested in worshiping this king when in fact he is only asking so that he can destroy him. And then we hear of the star changing position to guide the wise men on their way. After their audience with the king, they set out, and behold, the star that they had seen at its rising preceded them until it came and stopped over the place where the child was. And this, once again, actually is evident in the scientific record. 9 months, which is a significant period of time, right, for babies being born. 9 months after the wise men had set off on their journey, things get even more interesting. So the planet Jupiter, the king planet, was no longer over the king's star. Instead, on the horizon of the western sky, Jupiter did something even crazier. Jupiter came so close to the planet Venus, which is the second brightest planet in the sky, that their light merged and created the brightest thing that would have been in the sky at the time. And the Magi, along with the rest of the pagan world, knew that the planet Venus as the mother planet, mother and king coming together. And if at that point the Magi had begun their journey, by this time reaching Jerusalem, the orientation of Jupiter and Venus would have shifted to the south, which is where Bethlehem is. And also at that time, Jupiter's motion made it appear to have basically stopped in his tracks, just as St. Matthew says, the star rested over Bethlehem. In my mother's talk, she really liked the idea of linking it to this guidance of the star to an angel, which there's already angels happening. We know this from other accounts of the birth of Jesus, especially St. Luke's. And this works out perfectly from a theological perspective because in the ancient Jewish tradition, stars were associated with angels. And probably it's a bit of both, an angel and the stars doing something crazy that led the wise men to Bethlehem. And then the Jewish prophecies lead them there. And this is sort of a recalling of the angel leading the Israelites on their journey through the desert. Finally, we have the conclusion of today's gospel. They were overjoyed at seeing the star, and on entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother. They prostrated themselves and did him homage. Then they opened their treasures and offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed for their country by another way. So their journey reaches its end, and they enter the house. Mary and Joseph have found a house, thankfully, not in a cave or a shed anymore. They enter the house, and they see the child with Mary, his mother. And I know we have beautiful, statues of our nativity scenes where the Magi are kneeling before Jesus. It says they prostrated themselves. It doesn't say they knelt. Prostrate means you're lying face down on the ground in worship. That's how overwhelmed they were. This is homage that is only offered to a divine king. And ironically, none from Jerusalem are going to Bethlehem to do this. It is rather the pagan magi who are overjoyed at seeing him, and they offer him gifts. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Gold, the highest valued mineral, fit for a king, representing the kingship of Christ. Frankincense, a perfumed incense that is used in worship, meaning that they recognize Jesus as being divine. And finally, myrrh, which is an exotic spice used for burials, and it's a foreshadowing of the passion of Christ and of his humanity. In all of these events associated with Herod and the Magi and the birth of Jesus, we can make connections back to that original story that I talked about, the story of Balaam. Just as King Balak wanted to use Balaam, a sorcerer, to destroy Israel, so King Herod seeks to use the pagan Magi to destroy the Christ child. And it backfires. Balaam fails to cooperate with the king's plan, and he utters blessings instead of curses. And the Magi fail to assist Herod, and they do the child homage. And they return to their home a different way. And no doubt, all along their journey, they couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. And no doubt, when they reached their journey's end, they told everybody about it. They prepared their own people for the coming of Jesus Christ. And sure enough, by the time the Apostle Thomas reaches Persia and India just a few decades later, they are ready to accept the gospel immediately. And as Christmas break comes to an end, we sort of return to the regular flow of work and school. We too can be like the Magi, and we can bring the news of Jesus with us.